Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mitchell Institute's Schriever Space Power Series. I'm Kevin Chilton, Explorer Chair of the Mitchell Institute's Space Power Center of Excellence. The United States Space Force faces unprecedented challenges as they navigate an increasingly contested, congested, and competitive space domain. Peer competitors are rapidly advancing their capabilities, requiring us to develop innovative solutions at an unprecedented pace. At the forefront of these efforts is the Space Rapid Capabilities Office, where they're tasked with delivering timely and operationally relevant space superiority and resilience capabilities to the warfighter. As one of the 3 acquisition organizations within the Space Force, Space RCO plays a vital role in rapidly delivering first-of-their-kind operational space capabilities that protect space assets, defend joint force and allied operations from space-enabled attack, and also hold our adversaries' assets at risk. Today, I'm honored to have with us Dr. Kelly Hammett, Director and Program Executive Officer of the Space Rapid Capabilities Office. Dr. Hammett, welcome to the Mitchell Institute and the Space Power Series. It's great to have you with us today. I want to give you an opportunity to begin this morning with some of your own personal remarks.
General Chilton, thank you very much for having me this morning. Really looking forward to the opportunity. Thanks to the Mitchell Institute for continuing to spark dialogue about where we are evolving to as a service and as a nation, really, in space. And I'm just really looking forward to spending the time with you and telling you and the audience a lot more about the Space Rapid Capabilities Office. I will say that I like to call us the oldest acquisition agency in the service. We existed before the Space Force, and we came right in on day one into the Space Force when it was established. And so that's been 6.5 years ago, and I've just completed my 3rd year as the director and the PEO. So really settling in, and I think firmly got my hands on the wheel, and looking forward to fielding your questions and talking about what we're doing.
Terrific, thanks. And so you've been in the chair for almost 3 years now.
Just over 3 years.
Just over 3 years, that's great. And I'm sure you've developed and built a great team around you as well.
Absolutely. I like to say this is my 37th year of doing this. This is the best functional team of acquisition experts that I've ever worked with and had the opportunity to lead. Highly trained, highly experienced, highly motivated. And I think you might ask more about that later, but I just wanted to put that plug in early because it really does make a difference in acquisition. There's a lot of discussion about acquisition reform right now. And I'll just go ahead and put this out there because it might come back later. The president signed an executive order, I think it was in late February, directing acquisition reform. And the words that were used specifically said, make all acquisition in the Department of Defense look like what the Rapid Capabilities Offices do.
That's terrific.
And in the annex, specifically, we were listed, the Air Force RCO, the Army RCO, were all there as examples of how to go fast, cut red tape, empower teams, and get after rapid acquisition of critical capabilities.
That's great. Well, we have 3 acquisition agencies within the U.S. Space Force. So we have the Space Systems Command out in El Segundo, the Space Development Agency back here, and then your organization. Just to our audience and to educate me as well, what differentiates you, and then how are you complementary in the work that you do?
I think the primary differentiator is that, one, we are governed through a board of directors that has the secretary, the CSO, SAF-SQ, which is our acquisition head, and then a number of other OSD level principles that allow us again to kind of cut through red tape where a lot of organizations might have blockers that come from policy or other areas. We get all those people on board when we start a program, and they're all behind it, so that those types of things that might slow you down don't really typically happen to us. We tend to get waivers and approvals, staffing packages that are required go through really quickly. And so that helps us go really fast. I will say the other major difference, the only significant acquisition authority that we have that the others do not have is that we are JCIDS exempt by statute.
Okay.
So the requirements.
Can you explain that a little bit for our audience?
Yeah, the Joint Capability Integration Development System is the DoD 5000 directed way in which major programs of record get their requirements established and validated.
Got it.
And so that means their requirements have to go through the JROC, the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, and kind of like I just talked about, all that staffing in the building before you can even get to the JROC is what slows programs down on the front end. That can take years.
Right.
Back to the acquisition reform language that's currently out there, both in the SPEED Act, the Forged Act, that these have not been passed yet, but they're out in the public, and in the executive order, there was direction to review JCIDS and potentially eliminate it completely, which would level the playing field for everybody.
Yeah.
The downside of that, let me say the positive side of going through the JROC validation is then you have coordinated with everybody and everybody knows what you're doing. For us, it's a challenge working just through our board. We have not widely coordinated everything with all potential stakeholders or blockers, and that's intentional so that we can go fast. But again, sometimes those things pop up later as a hindrance.
Yeah.
So it requires a lot of my time as a senior leader when those things do pop up to go try to tamp them down, get alignment in what we're doing. Finally, I'm not going to say, I said, best team I've ever worked with. There are some other really good acquisition professionals at Space Development Agency and SSC. And the last thing is that our niche is really to provide space power, space superiority. We do a couple of other things because they were just gap fillers that were needed, but largely that's what we do, and so that's where our competency is. And that aligns us pretty closely to the combatant commands with their warfighting needs.
Got it. Talking about JCIDS, if my memory serves right, it was kind of developed to prevent the services developing redundant programs and make sure that, if the Army's building something and the Air Force is building something, why not just pick one service to build it if it's the same functional capability? I can't imagine that you have those tensions in the work that you do because you guys are the lead sled dog for space.
Correct, and so we typically don't. If there was any question of that, and I will say that there was a couple years ago, before we had our own service acquisition executive, there were questions about are there duplication between the different space acquisition organizations, and I will say if there was, it wasn't significant. If it was probably intentional because we wanted to pursue a couple different approaches. And then that was largely cleared up by establishing the Service Acquisition Executive for Space, having our own secretariat level set of teams at SAF SQ versus SAF AQ on the air side. And there was established a program executive officer assignment process. So deliberate choice made about which acquisition organization of the three would be assigned a given program.
Great. When Missile Defense Agency was stood up, they said, if you want this fast, you've got to give us certain authorities. One of them was colorless money, the ability to move money around within program without having to consistently go back to the Congress at some funding level for adjustments. Do you have similar authority?
I actually do, and that's another thing that's it's not statutory or it's just a policy, but it's a key thing where we have a single program element that is classified and a single unclassified program element, and we do have significant flexibility in moving money in that classified program element within our portfolio. Again, the exact words that are used in the SPEED Act. So take PEOs and make them portfolio executives and give them one line of money, and actually assign a PEO by entire mission area. So you remove any perception of duplication because you've got one PEO doing, say, missile warning, one PEO doing PNT, position, navigation, and timing. And we'll see where all this goes, but I think there will be evolution along these lines here in the next year or two.
Great, and so if one program and one particular PEO is behind schedule for whatever reason, supply chain, contractor performance, whatever, and another one is racing along and could use more money, if they're under executing and these guys, the other team needs more support, you can move that money over there without going through a long process?
We can, as long as we have congressional approval through our annual SAP
Through the
reports.
annual program.
Yeah, through the
Okay.
annual reports, and we've been able to make some significant changes like that. A perfect example, which we'll get into a little bit later, is R2C2, our Rapid Resilient Command and Control program. That is one in which we actually combined program offices. So it was the Space Systems Command Enterprise Ground Services program.
Right.
We combined that with our ground program, and we actually pooled the money and moved it into our line.
Okay.
And so that's an example. And we did that in an execution year.
That's so important to go fast, to have those authorities
Yep.
that you described. I think that's really important. You mentioned you have a pretty tight relationship with the Combatant Command. I'm assuming all of them, but particularly U.S. Space Command. And but what about? Talk to me a little bit about your relationship with, and this really gets into a requirements discussion. So you have a COCOM called U.S. Space Command, a combatant command that has requirements. And then you have terrestrial combatant command, specific, Indo-PACOM and EUCOM, et cetera, CENTCOM. And then you've got service requirements for their organized training and equip mission. And somewhere stuck in the middle of that is the operational level of war requirements that General Chess has out at Vandenberg for Space Forces 4. How do they, and certainly the chief and secretary, at the end of the day, that they're going to prioritize those requirements, funding requirements, or funding capabilities, et cetera. But how do the cards get dealt out? Are there certain lanes that you see that always come to you in these areas, or?
So this is a complicated discussion, but let me just say historically, I mentioned that the Space RCO existed before the service, and when it was stood up by act of Congress, actually by statute, as I alluded to earlier, it said that requirements will be generated first from STRATCOM, then Air Force Space Command, then U.S. Space Command as these things evolve.
Yeah, because STRATCOM had the mission before
Right.
U.S. Space Command
Right.
did. Okay, got it.
And then very shortly in my term, I was schooled by Secretary Kendall and then this CSO that the combatant commanders do not technically have requirements, to use acquisition speak. They have capability needs. They have integrated priority lists. They have their own category of things that they need.
Right.
But the services have, quote, requirements. And so it is a bit of a dance to try to negotiate between the combatant command desire, all those things that you just talked about. What I'll say is the story is evolving. It's evolving in a positive way. Where we sit today, we get what's called a capability needs statement from the combatant commands, any of them.
Yep.
And we take that into our hopper. We work with the service to understand, which requirements they want to prioritize. So through the 5 and the 8, getting coverage from the service, and then we will go to a board of directors meeting, and as you say, get direction from the secretary and the CSO that this is something that we should be doing, and it comes to the top of our priority list.
Right.
That if we don't do that type of coordination, then we're out of sync with, say, the 8. Then we don't get funded.
Right.
So we have something on the books. But it's still an accelerated process where, like I say, we'll get a 1 to 2 pager from U.S. Space Command. I actually have a review with General Whiting here in July to update all those capability need statements. But then, like I said, we take it through the service hopper and SQ as well. I should have mentioned that because they have this program assignment, watch and follow and reporting type of requirement. But at the end of the day, we have a vote, and actually all the PEOs have a vote in what programs do you take on, because either you don't have the resources, and that's been a challenge lately with personnel in particular.
Yeah, so
but they can
be,
throw money
not
at
just
us.
talking expertise. as
Right,
well.
right.
Yeah,
If they throw a big requirement and a bunch of money at us, which we're kind of looking at in 26, but we don't have the people. Back to my teams are extremely lean. Unusual for normal program offices can have 200 to 300 people per ACAT equivalent program, which is something over $535 million of RDT&E. I have ACAT 1 programs that are run by 5 people. And so if you throw another ACAT 1, I was like, and I've got to have a government program manager, I've got to have a government PCO, a contracting officer, and so that is a challenge. But I will say it's starting to come together from the acquisition and the operations side. We've established a couple of forums. One that we call the OAT. It's actually Spock started the Operations, Acquisition, Test, and Training, and it brings together the three acquisition organizations, STARCOM and Spock, to essentially look at all the capabilities that are coming, try to synchronize those. This is after the requirements process. How do we manage it? But then it can generate more requirements because we have to figure out how to C2 all those things and put them together. And that's kind of where we are right now. And the S4S also plays a role in that because we are looking at capabilities that come from the O plans.
And S4S is Space Forces Space. That's General Shesh.
That's General Shesh's team, who is the component to General Whiting's team.
Right.
So he is tasked with writing the O plans in support of General Whiting. And so we look at, forces that are to be employed in a time phase sequence, and that again helps us kind of get requirements for those things and then synchronize when we deliver and across an enterprise, make them available to be offered, presented, from the service.
Now, what about, I don't know if they still have them, but they used to have joint urgent operational needs that would come out of the COCOM.
Yes.
Do those typically flow to you?
So in my 3 years, I have not had one assigned to me, and we chatted about this a little bit earlier. The timelines of those are extremely fast. They can be 6 to 12 months, which really doesn't leave you time for developmental activities. You're really going to go procure a commercial service or activity at that point. And that's likely going to go to something like the Commercial Space Office, or even the JCO, the Joint Commercial Office that operates for U.S. Space Command.
But if it's not out there already.
But if it's not there, if it's a first of a kind, it's likely going to come to me. There is what I'll call a draft GEON. So I kind of went through this whole spiel about synchronized capability delivery in the service. This is a positive step, like I said, that we've adopted recently. We have incremental capability deliveries. We talk about an increment 1, an increment 1A, 1B, 1C. We have aligned what we call the first capability increment to the draft GEON that came out of U.S. Space Command last year for Space C2. Take a certain set of kit and again figure out how to machine-to-machine C2 that so that if conflict in space comes, we are able to respond at a time and a tempo that is demanded by those circumstances. And that has not typically been the way things have been done in the Space Force. As I said, I've only been doing this for 3 years, and it was a nuance that I observed immediately upon coming into office, is that there actually were several acquisition activities that were not fully integrated into a kill chain. They were pieces. There was a system. And then over here, there was a C2 piece. And then over here, there was a network. But they weren't necessarily connected into the end-to-end pieces that let you do a mission.
And then when you throw block upgrades into each one of those, you got to synchronize those across
exactly.
as well.
And you mentioned the Missile Defense Agency. I spent 5 years in the Missile Defense Agency in the Airborne Laser Program. I actually retired as a military officer as a director of engineering. So I was very familiar with how we synchronize capability delivery across an organization like that. And it was a kind of a platform and a drumbeat that I hounded for the first couple of years. And Mr. Calvelli, thankfully, listened to me and several others, of course. And so right before leaving office, he signed out a memo elevating what we call the Space Systems Integration Office Director to a position that is the chief engineer of the service, and put him both over the Space Systems Integration Office that sits out in LA and SQA, the architectures group at headquarters, with the authority to then work requirements and architectures, and then once those systems are in flow, the interoperability, the integration of those, and that's an engineering function.
For sure.
Engineering review boards, configuration control boards. We did not have these types of processes across systems in the service until about a year ago. Actually, it was just about a month ago at the last Program Integration Council, which was something General Gutlein championed a few years ago. These were great forums for bringing the acquisition organizations together to share information, but they were not decision-making. bodies, because there was no governance process. Like, who could make the decision? There was nobody in charge.
Yeah.
Now we have a chief engineer in charge of a configuration control board, which can actually levy requirements on programs so that this talks to A talks to B,
Yep.
and so on down the chain, so that you can actually, like I said, deliver kill chains and full up mission capabilities.
Yeah.
And this is super exciting, very nascent. We haven't even had our first enterprise configuration control board, but all this stuff is working in the back, where we have incremental now design reference missions, we have requirements documents, and like I said, it may drive System B to change its message format to something different.
Yep.
Now you need to talk to the rest of the stuff.
Right.
You can't just be over here on your own.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening right now.
That's terrific. It was that kind of discipline that saved the International Space Station program.
I believe it.
Yeah, because you talk about a bunch of different elements trying to come together
Yep.
at once. It was the establishment of a requirements control board as
Yep.
well as a configuration control board.
Right.
And sometimes they need to say, no, we're not changing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, we got to deliver.
But somebody's got to make the decisions.
That's right.
And if all the PEOs are allowed to just continue to execute their programs without that rigor, we will have disconnected.
You'll be disconnected. Yeah.
Yes.
Let me shift gears a little bit
Okay.
to satellite manufacturing. So it used to take years to make one, and we only made onesies and twosies, but now we're seeing mass production, particularly in the commercial area of satellites with Starlink and other things like
Yes.
that. Is this something that you're trying to adopt as well as you go forward? And if so, what are the challenges?
So I want to say a couple things. A shout out to my good buddies over at Space Development Agency. One of the things that Derek has been able to do is establish a big enough budget and support for that, where he can lay out these incremental deliveries every 2 years, and he can have competition, and he can fund multiple vendors to go at speed.
Yeah.
So he's been driving that into the space acquisition culture on the DoD side. We are trying to leverage that, but I talked about the challenge for us is that most of the time we are given a first of capability. So the full up commercial solution does not necessarily exist, but where there is, say, commercially available bus technology, propulsion technology, sensor technology, then we need to drive that into our acquisition strategies and make the non-recurring engineering the only thing that is the custom development. And that's a major shift that I've driven into the Space RCO, because we used to just do a full up competition to all the big traditional primes and just throw a bag of money out and say, it's all up to you. You figure it out, do it however you want, just give it to me fast. And that wasn't working very well for us. We have had to drive what the industry will call make-buy decisions into the buy category more than the make. But that requires the buyers to be smart enough to know what's out there, right? Because otherwise, like I said, we would just put all the responsibility on a contractor and let them make all those choices. What they tend to do is make decisions, because that's more internal profit, that's more internal revenue. And so that's a natural behavior on their part, but we have to construct our acquisition approaches to only allow that when it makes sense.
Okay, now, so you use the example of an off-the-shelf bus,
Yes.
for example. But let's say it's even in that case with a unique payload, they need 50 of them.
Yeah.
So after you do the engineering development and solve the hard problems and put a program together, would you typically hand that off to one of the other acquisition agencies, or would you go into managing the production line?
That's currently the model.
Okay.
Is that when we develop a number of systems, I call it program transfer or program transition. Program transfer we will typically give to Space Systems Command for full-scale production. Transition is where we actually field something. Like, we're only going to buy a few of these, and we're going to then transition, and it's now called fielding, to SPOC, really, Space Operations Command, and then it's their job to go out and emplace systems. I'll use a perfect example for both of these is RMT, our Remote Modular Terminals. These are our ground-based SATCOM jammers. And we are, per the mission area design that the Space Security and Development Program did a few years back, funded to build 160 of these things. We built, and we're building them in a block upgrade configuration. We have Block 0 and Block 1. Block 0 was 24 systems. We procured those 24 systems in under 18 months.
Wow.
Using special acquisition approaches and the delegated authorities that we have. So we got the first 24. We are in the process of fielding those 24 systems right now in conjunction with SPOC and the terrestrial component commanders who will have these in their AOR. And then we are in the process of negotiating the Block 1 production contract for the remaining, whatever it is, 136 units. And once we award the production contract, we intend to hand that off to SSC for surveillance, and then they will then have essentially the O&M back end for RMT, all of it.
Which makes sense.
And,
for life of the program.
Yes,
kind of thing.
yeah, and that's the model we're on right now. But again, there's a lot of evolution in mission deltas, and part of that right now, a lot of the sustainment is moving into these mission deltas out of SSC. So it's a very dynamic environment, and it's trying to again keep all the ships sailing in formation, if you will, is a bit of a challenge. But that's where we are right now.
I can imagine there's a temptation once you birth the baby that you want to maintain control of it all the way through its life cycle, but that's not your job, really, right?
It has not been up to this point. What I will say is, again, an evolving story. In our flight programs, that's probably a little bit more where we are going to head. In the next year or so, we'll be launching our first full-up satellites. And I'll talk about this a little bit more, but the current plan and agreement I have with General Miller is we will actually remain Satellite Control Authority will remain under us through LEOPS, launch and early operations, to a point where we show the system works, and then it's back to a resource question. Do they have all the squadrons and all the people and all the infrastructure that they need to operate all these new systems?
Well, that's such an important point.
They don't.
And this and this is why Mitchell Institute continues to advocate for increased funding for the Space Force.
Absolutely.
And not just funding for stuff, but for manpower.
That's right.
As well, manpower positions, because basically we've been in a 4-year developmental period, and now we're moving into a deployment and operational period.
That's right.
And we don't have a lot of time to get it done given the threat. And so you don't want to have a capability out there without people having in the operational fields, having the equipment to operate it, training to operate it, the checklist to operate it, et cetera. And if they're the anchor to delivering a capability to U.S. Space Command, for example, that's not good.
So a couple points in that regard. I'll go back to the RMT example. One of the things we've done right there is we've set aside 3 of the units to go to the training range. So they will have systems that they can train on. That's not always the case. Particularly with space vehicles.
In development,
we typically don't give a spare training vehicle. I know that's to CSO's deep anger. He hates the fact that they don't get training assets. However, that being said, for the orbital warfare systems that we are developing, we've got a path that we're going to go down here, and it involves our R2C2 software, which we are putting on the ops floor there at Kirtland under what still is for now, Space Systems Command, SCI, the Rapid Prototyping Directorate. The great thing about that is we will put that software on that floor. We will start flying the experimental birds that come out of the space test program, things like roosters. Actually, the first one will be LDPE-3A. That system is already on orbit.
Help me with that.
Long duration propulsed ESPA.
Okay.
These are the ESPA rings that Northrop builds with multiple ports that you can put things on. They go to GEO. And there have been 3 of these. There's an LDPE 1, 2, and 3. And so where we are now is Satellite Control Authority for LDPE 1 and 2 was transferred to STARCOM. So these are range assets that they can now use for test and training. LDPE 3A will transition probably in about a year, but now it will have the operational software for the orbital warfare systems, and then all the rest of my systems that come will be on that same ground software. So in terms of the training requirements, this was a decision, again, that we made to try to reduce the training burden, to stop delivering one-off ground
Right.
with every new system and capability. And again, that's the experimental path that we're on right now. It's working really well, but you now will have a pipeline. You will have a playing ground, if you want, a training ground, where you can use non-operational assets to exercise, RPO planning and all types of missions, get your feet wet with that, and actually have an on-orbit testing range, as well as just the satellite control software and simulators.
Which will be consistent.
Which will be consistent.
Which is great.
And then it flows naturally into the operational
Yeah.
systems that are going to Delta 9.
That's great. That's great. That's always been one of the frustrations in the space business is we built operational command and control systems, no trainers.
Right.
So you learned on the console. And we just can't do that anymore going forward with the diversity of mission sets that we now have, particularly space superiority.
Yeah. Now, like I said, this is focused on orbital warfare and Delta 9, but even so, we've done R2C2 in a unique way in that we're leveraging the cloud-based infrastructure from Amazon Web Services. This has been another thing the service has traditionally not done right, I will say. They have built government-owned hardware stacks, and then 5 years later it's obsolete and you're vendor locked. You're paying for things like OCX out the nose over and over and over.
Yeah.
And so R2C2 will be government-owned. It's hosted on AWS, and it lives in multiple instantiations, from unclassified up to TS SAP-SAR.
Okay.
That was one of the major hurdles, was that you couldn't get onto the cloud-based systems without the accreditation at those levels. And my R2C2 team was able to do that in under 90 days.
Wow.
When we stood the program up about a year and 4 months ago. So we got the accreditations in place, we got into the environment, and we are now building out the R2C2 platform and the SATOP services that you need to fly systems at GEO, mission plan, deconflict, and then go out. It actually has antenna broker. So it is back to this, our approach is end to end. And so we have everything from the ground to the satellite to the networks, like I just talked about, to the antennas.
Got it.
And so we can do it all at GEO. For the orbital warfare missions to start, just to keep the scope contained. That was a lesson learned from EGS. Enterprise was everything. And so again, what are the priority requirements? There weren't any. So they were just kind of all over the place. By this level of focus, we've been able to make huge progress in the space superiority or orbital warfare area.
That's great. So we've thrown a few acronyms around
have.
here, but that's okay because some of them are just now rolling out.
That's right.
R2C2,
Yep.
the Rapid Resilient Command and Control program.
Yep.
And my understanding then, just listening to what you just said, is that's really about the operational level of war, directing operations. So at General Chess's level, all the software is right there for him. But perhaps it reaches down into the tactical operational level as well to make sure you have platforms where you don't have to uniquely train people up on the things that aren't particularly unique. Obviously, you have different mission sets for the systems.
That's right.
But it'd be kind of like, everybody goes to pilot training and learns to fly in the same type of airplane.
That's
they
right.
learn the fundamentals, then they go get their specific area, but they still got a stick and throttles and everything else, right?
Yes.
They're in the same place and
screens look the same.
Exactly.
The
That's kind of the goal here.
Yes,
R2C2.
and then let me just say the service is, I will say, with the combatant command, kind of evolving the C2 construct. And by that I mean specifically authorities of who can do what. Yeah. And my conversations with General Miller, he wants to have command at echelon. He would like to be able to have the tactical units be able to actually, manage their systems. And that's what R2C2 can do. And because it's cloud-based, doesn't have to go to a particular building at Schriever or wherever you can get access to the right level of network, you can have people operating, and so
that's important for continuity of operations.
It is, yes, as well as again getting away from this maxed out infrastructure. Say at Schriever,
yes, yeah,
right, where you can put op centers wherever you need. The desire, I think, this will evolve from policy, again, as a more centralized execution of a space fight.
Yeah, but so long as the technology supports either decision,
There you go.
Then
you go.
That's up to the policymakers.
That's exactly right, and that's why we've built it this way.
Terrific.
Now, a number of the systems will, at that more operational level, the software for that operational C2 is Kronos, which is being developed out of Space Systems Command.
Okay.
And so that is the big brain that could potentially orchestrate across all systems, but that's a lot of work and that's a lot of complexity.
Yeah.
And again, if that's taken out, if it doesn't work, you can divert back to call up the ops center and say, Squadron X, take out these 5 targets, and they can do that.
Okay.
If they have access to R2C2.
Perfect. Okay, there's another new one for me too.
Okay.
SCAR.
SCAR.
Okay, SCAR, satellite. You tell me what it stands for. Satellite Communications Augmentation Resource.
Yes.
And my understanding is, so we have a satellite control network.
We do.
And it certainly wasn't designed for these massive constellations
That's right.
that we're putting up, nor was it designed for the new missions of space superiority and defense, which is part of that. So offense and defense. And so this is our way to scale this system, replace it and scale it. Is that fair to say?
Right now, augment and scale. That's where the A comes from.
Yeah.
But let me just back up a little bit. The current SCN is constituted of 13 large parabolic dishes distributed all around the world. The way those things operate is 1v1, one antenna, one satellite, one contact at a time. Yeah. All right, so that's the limit.
That's not going to work.
That's not going to work. You can imagine
Yeah.
when you get into a space war fight and there are multiple systems moving around, reacting to threats and prosecuting missions, that you're going to need a significantly increased bandwidth and capacity to command all those actions.
Right.
The thing I forgot to mention about R2C2, which I'll come back to now, the other major thing that R2C2 has is rules-based automation. So the current CONOP of how you would execute one of those missions is, like I said, you would get on the SCN, you would establish a contact, you would get status of health, you would get telemetry, you would say, okay, turn on this new payload, okay, turn 3 degrees left, okay, with an operator making all these decisions and sending these commands stepwise. R2C2 will allow you to say, like I just said, there's 3 targets, take them out, 1 command. The birds get automated sequences of mission planned activities where they can go execute those missions. So now what have you done? You've increased the ability to scale, and you've reduced operator workload and involvement. You want a man on the loop, maybe pulling the trigger at the end of some sequence of activities, but they don't have to command everything. So that reduces your capacity. Then you add that with SCAR, which is a ground-based phased array TT&C system, which can do multiple simultaneous or near simultaneous contacts with multiple birds.
And you'll have a lot more of these antennas available?
That is the plan. The words have to be very proper because we don't have an FY26 budget or an appropriation.
But that's the vision.
But that is the vision. Okay. And what I said last week, which went out in the news this morning on Breaking Defense, was from a force design perspective, enough analysis has been done to say the SCN is not going to cut it, and we're going to need several of these. How many? Don't know exactly. That will depend on where they go, what again the specific requirements are for contacting which birds to do which missions, but it's going to be more than a couple.
And they'll be mobile, is that right?
They are relocatable.
Relocatable, yes.
Okay.
Because the current satellite control network is fixed.
That's correct.
Which makes it vulnerable in today's world.
And the current SCARs, I'm looking around the room, will consist of what we call Badger arrays, somewhere between 4 and 6 of those, and each of those is about as big as this wall and about as high as half the wall.
Okay.
So 4 of those, which can all go in.
It's like a THAAD radar size kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so it is aircraft transportable. It's made to go into a Connex and be able to be locatable, but it's not going to be like, run on the move and do stuff. But you can relocate
them. Be transportable,
yes.
Which will help survivability.
Absolutely.
So that sounds great. Well, thanks because these are new terms,
yes.
SCAR and R2C2, so thanks for talking about that a bit. I'm going to shift gears again here to one of the, I'm sure, still ongoing debates. General Shaw talked about having the ability to maneuver without regret.
Yep.
And so one ConOps for that is to have refueling capability on orbit. Another would be to know just when they run out of gas, launch more of them, because you got a hot production line and you can keep that going. And I know you're not the requirement writer,
right,
but you're the executor. Where are we headed in this debate, in your view?
From my perspective, you said earlier we have product line buses coming online. That is true for LEO. It is not necessarily so much true for GEO. Maybe a little more true for MEO, because of the MEO missile warning stuff that is being done there. So we really don't have that option at GEO. So the answer is, right, it depends. Do the mission analysis. And so I think where you can replenish and go proliferated, that's what we've done at LEO with the proliferated warfighter space architecture that Derek Tournier and SDA is building for missile warning and missile defense.
Yeah.
Right, those don't need to be refuelable because we're putting a whole bunch of them up there.
Right, and you're going to keep production lines open.
That's the intent. For GEO and for, again, potential orbital warfare systems, we're not going to build a gazillion of them. Yeah. We would we'll see, right? We'll see where we end up in budget space. But what I think the CSO published a couple things in the last year. He published a terms of reference. We published a SPIFFy. He published a space warfighting construct. And in all of these, there's a thread of having designated weapon systems like reconnaissance and pursuit and attack. And if you have those types of things that have to fly all over the place, right, and service multiple targets, and they're highly specialized and not coming off a product line bus, then I think you want to have some refueling or replenishment capability. Yeah. I've had lots of conversations in the last year that really the term we should probably be using is maneuver and logistics. Right? It's space warfighting logistics is what you want. Yeah. And whatever it takes to get there. Now, back to the technology side of the house. Is refueling currently rapidly available? There's a couple of standards for refueling ports that are out there in the US. And we're getting ready over the next year to do several demonstrations back to that space test program and showing first of type of demos before we put into programs. That's coming in Rooster and some of these other things that are coming out of the Innovation and Prototyping Directorate. So Great. We have funded a refueler to go dock with one of the systems that have both ports, so that we can demonstrate the feasibility of both. We can then make trades on cost and complexity and all those types of things. From the warfighting perspective, and again, you wore a uniform, were a combatant commander for many years. I wore a uniform, was never a combatant commander, but I did my PME. Maneuver is pretty critical. It is. To warfighting. Absolutely. And so I think we have to pursue high thrust, high delta V bus capabilities. There are a number of commercial companies targeting this area, but that's kind of like my requirement space. And I'll just say recently, we published an RFI, a request for information, for what we called the DSO bus, the Dynamic Space Operations Bus. And my team did a really nice job of putting together a 6-page CUI document that CUI is controlled unclassified at first. So it's not classified, it's not SAPSAR, it's something we can share with the community and tell them essentially what type of requirements are we pursuing in this capability area, and looking to tie all this together, an alignment of commercially available systems with things that we are also doing. Yeah. And then working with Brian McLean out at SSC to potentially have a product line bus capability for this. And then we would just pick those product line buses off the line and add the special payloads and whatever else is required. It's a vision we've been discussing for a couple years. It's great because Brian used to work for me. We think a lot alike. We work very closely together. And so it's something that we're pressing on. I'll put in a plug that our DSO bus workshop is, I think, actually 30 or 31 July in Albuquerque. So if people are more interested in interacting with us on this, learning where we're trying to go, come to that workshop.
That's great.
And I think we sent invitations out recently.
Early in my career, I was a flying airplanes, and of course refueling was essential for
Yes.
a lot of our missions.
Yes.
And we had the luxury of putting the tanker wherever you wanted to go and going
That's
to
right.
it or rendezvousing. I think some folks, I love your answer, it depends. It's a classic weapons
Right.
school answer, by the way.
Right.
If you have to change inclinations to refuel somebody, then you're going to use all your fuel changing inclination. So
That's right.
where the orbits, where it makes sense to put refuelers and how the orbitology, if you will, inclinations, where they are, geo, et cetera, versus the LEO assets, it matters, right?
It really does. I think the service will evolve with some more force design work to come to this same conclusion. But there is the technology piece. I will say one other thing that's been very interesting to watch over the last 3 years. I think when the Space Force first established itself, they had to be very limited in scope and mission space, and not take on everything in the universe in terms of capabilities that they were fielding. I think that is again evolving. We will get to some analysis that says which particular systems need it. We will do some of these technology demonstrations to convince ourselves it's feasible, and then maybe we go big.
Yeah.
I will say, I do also have a program right now in flow that is designed to be refuelable.
Okay.
So
you
there
have
may
the
be an
option.
once we get to showing it works,
Yeah.
maybe we then have an operational asset where we prove that extending the life is of value when we use this thing to move around and perform missions in GEO. The other piece I was going to get to there is that early on the service kind of thought commercial was going to go big in this area, and there really isn't much of a marketplace based on everything we just discussed.
Right.
Most GEO assets that are commercial go up, sit in their slot, do whatever their terrestrial facing mission is, and they don't necessarily need to be refueled. I will say there are some counterexamples, and you just gave a perfect one, where a bird has to sit in its slot, and over time it drifts in inclination or out, and then it does need to be put back.
Right.
And so there is a small market, which I know some commercial companies are pursuing, to do what they call not necessarily refueling, but the jetpack type
Right.
of
They'll
concept.
rendezvous dock.
They'll
with a
rendezvous
new-
dock. They'll move it back to where it needs to go,
Yeah.
and provide that as a service.
service.
So that piece has evolved commercially, but the other really hasn't.
Great. You know, you kind of touched on it, and we'll be quick here because I want to give our audience a few minutes for questions. But AI, how and there's new systems coming out that are, I would say, akin to a radar warning receiver on an airplane, where you can, the satellite knows, and the operator on the ground can be informed as well, but almost immediately the satellite knows if it's being painted by another radar, or if something's approaching it, perhaps if they have an active radar system on board. And sometimes things happen so quickly that you don't have time for a lot of decision making on the ground. So you have to automate these decisions, particularly for defense. You know, like I think you alluded to on the offensive side, there might be a human in the loop for weapons release or effects release. Where are you think? How are you thinking about how you apply some of AI to the space fight, if you will, in the future?
Two very targeted thrusts right now. One is on I kind of talked about the dynamic sequencing of maybe a local fight. If you have this Kronos, big brain, operational C2 thing that has a plan, and no plan survives first contact with the enemy, then the system, if you go send a constellation out to, again, service a set of targets, it probably needs to optimally plan that mission using artificial intelligence and machine learning, and then it probably needs to react. Because again, the enemy has a vote, and they will likely do something that requires us to observe and learn and change our planned behavior. And again, you don't, given the I'll say the sparseness of the SSN coverage at GEO, you can't have an operator watching all that and making those decisions. That has to happen locally with onboard learning. The other piece is kind of like you said, in terms of processing own ship awareness, in terms of both indications and warning and observing the local neighborhood. It's not is the reverse case, if you will.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
You are being attacked.
Yeah.
And what are you seeing? How are you processing that information? What are you learning about it? And then what types of courses of action are you generating? And then again, the things that makes it artificial intelligence is you don't present all those to an operator. It selects one.
Yeah.
And goes ahead and executes. Again, due to timeline and lack of the ability to have a human in the loop. You want those types of capabilities. We are building R2C2 to have those types of capabilities in it.
Terrific.
That will come after we build out the first set of common core services and we're flying satellites routinely, then we put the bells and whistles. And the contract that we just we put out about a year and a half ago, we have 20 design agents on that IDIQ contract, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. That's what an IDIQ stands for. And several of them are AI specialists. The experiment that we were doing here is we hired software experts, not necessarily satellite designers but software experts, and several of them are quite good in AI, and we're eager to get that injected into R2C2.
Great. Well, let's turn the Q&A over to the audience.
All right.
And Aidan will coordinate this for us. I would just remind our audience members, we'd sure appreciate it if you would identify yourself, and if you're part of a particular organization, if you identify that organization as well. And with that, Aidan, over to you.
Oh, sir. First we have Greg Hadley with Air and Space Forces magazine.
Hi, Dr. Hammett. Thanks for doing this. My question was on flight operation. You mentioned this is kind of a transition point for the Space RCO to get more into those full flight operations. Obviously, a lot of your portfolio is classified, but what can you say of what is the biggest challenge in that transition there?
I would say there's a couple things. One is having a cadre of experienced flight planners and operators that can extend, I'll say, our mission space from we designed it, we delivered it, we tested it, now launch it, and then go through the LEOPS and those stages. We don't have a stable of folks that to do that. We are trying to onboard a team that is larger and has more experience in that area. And we are also working very closely, as I said, with the SSC, SCI guys there. I'll call it Colonel Roth's team. Colonel Joe Roth retires, I think, on Friday. But that team can provide us some of the human capital. The rest is back to, I will say, kind of where do we have the range, the test range to do these types of flight operations and checkouts, and some of the observables that are related to that, which are challenging, and that just gets back to policy questions that we're gonna have to get through, because as I said, a number of the capabilities we are delivering are not things that we do right now, and so if we make those visible, that will tip our hand. In some cases, we might want to do that. Sure. Intentionally to send messaging or
deterrence.
Deterrence,
yeah,
right?
A little deterrence.
But that's probably the other one.
Great.
And
Thank you.
Probably, Greg, the last one is at GEO. There, we talked about getting SCARs online. There's not a lot of available antenna capacity at GEO currently, even commercially. And so that will be another bandwidth limiter that will kind of restrict where we do some of these flight ops and how often we can do it.
So SCAR will be able to reach all.
SCAR will be able to help us solve that problem.
Neo Geo? Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, Aidan, we're ready for another question.
Next we have Frank Wolf with Defense Daily.
Yeah, hi. Just wanted to go back to SCAR again. And I think you mentioned, if I'm not mistaken, you mentioned that there were 19 antennas for satellite control network. 13, I'm sorry. I thought it was 19. I wonder if you could clarify that. I thought, from what I thought, from like counting them up, I guess, at Vandenberg, Diego Garcia, England, etc. I thought there were 19. Could you update that?
I'm not an expert. You may be right on that. I was thinking 13, but it may be 19. The SCN program office is the right one to ask for it. But
okay. Yeah, no problem on that. And I just wondered, just in terms of SCAR, Blue Halo, I guess, got that $1.4 billion contract for that, for SCAR back in 2022. So I wondered if you could give us any kind of update on that, if what's going on with that. And again, it sounds like there are going to be more than the 19 antennas, as you had discussed earlier. Wondered if there are going to be hundreds, or what is going to be going to meet the demand here in the future in terms of versus China, Russia, et cetera. And when you've, I guess, Blue Halo had talked about, again, as you were mentioning, sort of the Badger part of it. So I wondered if you could sort of address that, Blue Halo, and if there's been other contractors for the antennas.
Sure. Up to this point, it has been, Blue Halo has been our prime contractor. The $1.4 billion award we gave them was including an EDU, an engineering development unit, a first operational system, and then it had options for up to 12. And so we have not funded them because we don't have the money for all 12 yet. So they have gone over the course of the last couple of years through, I'll call it 3 generations of what we call so design iterations on the actual the RF sub elements that go in the Badger array. We think we are at production level with the tile design now. They are integrating those systems up, and I think we put in the press release that we expect to have the first unit later this summer, and the first thing that we can take out in the field by the end. I think it's the first Badger this summer, first full-up operational Badger, and first unit by the end of the year. So we are getting to the point where we expect to take these out to the field and test them and bring them out and verify that we've met the performance requirements that we established. Couple things. Recently, Blue Halo merged, or if you will, was acquired by a company called, I think it's called Aero Venture, AV. I think the new company is just called AV. And so they are the majority owner between Blue Halo and AV. So that's a development that you'll see going forward. You won't see Blue Halo, you'll see AV, and maybe do a little homework on who that is. Finally, just in full transparency, and I've been saying this for a little while here, if we're given a bunch more money and we've got to go build these at scope and scale, we might go out and hire other companies that can do this. They don't all have to be identical, as I mentioned earlier. We will place these around the world. The reason we put the contract out for 12 is we had analysis that said 12 could handle the worldwide capacity. And so I think when the budget settles, we'll be somewhere between 3 and 12. I don't know exactly how many we'll get funded for. But that's kind of the scope of it. It won't be hundreds. It'll be on that order, and that's what's envisioned to be needed for the next, I'll say, 5 to 10 years.
Will the current satellite control network be sustained, or would this be an absolute replacement?
So that's a trade. I think right now in the budget is some level of modernization for the current SCN. The problem is, and I know you had it in your notes, I like to make the joke all the time, right? What's the oldest weapon system in the Department of the Air Force? It's the B-52. What's the second oldest? It's the satellite control network. So a lot of these are analog electronics, and back to, they are not identical. So I talked to Shannon Pallone, who's the PEO over this, and she says it's just a nightmare because they're like analog electronics that you have to go try to find on eBay when something breaks and goes out. There is no supply of these spare parts anymore. So I think eventually it either will have to do a major refurb of the back end electronics on these, or we'll have to replace them with SCARs. And again, we'll see how SCAR proves out, look at the price point, make those decisions on down the road.
Terrific. Well, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've come to the end of this Schriever Space Power series. Thank you again, Dr. Hammett, for taking time to come in and speak with us today. I think I've learned a lot, that's for sure. I hope our audience did too. And from all of us here at MI Space, have a great Space Power Day.